Welcome to Dead Man Talking. Tonight's show is a really scary story. I loved reading through this story and I can't wait to put it out there with you guys. It's entitled, There's Something Still Out There. Let's get straight into that. When I was young, around 10 or so, my aunt and uncle would run a haunted hike type of event on their property out in the boonies of west central Wisconsin. They held it for a few years, always a handful of days before Halloween hit, to get people in the spirit of things. It was a really popular event from what I remember. It seemed to pull in people from all over the area. What made it special, what set it apart from all other haunted events, was that it was staged in the woods, out in the middle of nowhere, with a gaggle of theatre majors from the local college my aunt worked at playing the monsters. The location of the property made it easy to feel fully immersed in the scares, and the kids' enthusiasm for scaring the shit out of people was the stuff of legend. The course itself was well developed too. My uncle had made a wide, well-marked path that wound up a hill that made up one side of the valley the location was tucked into. Starting along a line of pine trees was eventually taking people pretty deep into the woods. Along the way, he had built stations for the monsters to hide at. There was a trapdoor just off the path early in the course where someone would lunge out at your feet. Later on, someone who was good at keeping very still would hide amongst a vignette of scarecrows only to come to life once you'd let your guard down. There was even some pipes running through the ground from a small gully that allowed someone's voice to echo and seem everywhere at once. The walk ended in a steep descent to a shed where participants could calm their nerves and have a hot cocoa or cider before heading home. I helped out in the shed as much as a kid could. I'd hand out sandwiches and drinks to the college kids before we opened for business, and then helped hand out drinks to customers as they passed through after their hike. It was a gig that allowed me to get to know the monsters and what their scares were, and then also find out from the customers which scare was their favourite. It was always interesting to me to hear what sort of things scared which person. Overall, things went pretty smoothly for the venture, but one night, something unusual happened. It was getting towards the end of the night, and I was handing out cups of hot drink to one of the last groups. It consisted of a few young people, probably college-aged, and they seemed particularly unnerved. None of them were talking much, and one of the girls kept looking over her shoulder like something was going to come up behind her, or like she was expecting someone to come in the door. This was different than most people of their age. Usually, they'd be laughing and ribbing each other over who had been more afraid of things like that. I thanked them for coming, per my script, and then asked which scare they had liked best. For a long moment, no one spoke, but then one of the boys broke the silence. I don't know if we liked it the best, but the scariest bit was when that guy dropped out of the tree. I frowned, because I could not remember anyone going up in a tree for a scare. In fact, I was pretty certain my aunt and uncle had put the kibosh on tree climbing for scares, because it was too dangerous for everyone involved. I opened my mouth to say something, but the nervous girl beat me to it. How did he move like that, on all fours? And what kind of mask did he have on? It was really weird. I only shrugged, as I was still confused on what they had seen in the woods. My first guess was that one of the monsters, more than likely one of my cousins, went against my uncle's rule and started doing their own improvised scare. But before I could ask what the girl meant by moving on all fours and the weird mask, my aunt had appeared, asking how their walk was. The same comments were repeated to her, and she frowned, as I had, confused by what they described to her. By then, another group had come in, and I was waiting behind the first, already enthralled with the story they had overheard. So when you say they were faceless, a boy from the other group asked, beating my aunt to the punch. The nervous girl fidgeted with her hands, not looking at the boy, but between the floor and the doorway. Like, the mask they wore was pale, or maybe white, and had no eyes, no nose, no mouth. It was creepy as fuck. I don't want to see it again. I couldn't recall anyone having a mask like that. Vampires werewolves, a zombie or two, sure, but nothing like that. I glanced up at my aunt, who had gone pale. And they walked on all fours, like on their hands and knees? No, it was weird. Another boy from the nervous group spoke up, his voice shaking. Like he dropped out of a tree and, like, scuttled towards us, like his arms and legs were bent wrong. But it was hard to see because once we caught sight of it, we ran up the trail. Did you see where it went? My aunt asked, her face still ghostly pale. The group collectively shook their heads no. Is one of your workers in trouble? A member of the newer group asked, chuckling to himself. My aunt shook her head, muttering as she turned from the group. We don't have anyone like that working for us. That's seriously creepy. I'm kind of bummed whoever it was didn't do it for our group. The first boy from the other group said, ignoring my aunt's comment and elbowing forward for some cider. I mean, I never saw the one werewolf guy coming from the break in a tree line, but the faceless guy would have been a treat. The members of the nervous group seemed to only agree half-heartedly, but the others barely noticed. I passed out cocoa and cider and thanked everyone for coming, but my aunt had disappeared, reappearing a moment later with a walkie she used to keep in contact with her husband as he directed the line and helped take money. Yes, I'm telling you the group describes someone who isn't working with us. I don't know what's out there, but... She stopped short when she realised I was listening, heaving a small sigh when she made the second realisation that I'd already heard too much. Please, walk through after the last group, see if you can find it. A shiver ran up through my body, and I tried not to think about what was out there in the woods. Instead, I focused on handing out drinks and counting the minutes until my mother would arrive to take me home. About 20 minutes later, the last group was leaving the shed, just as the monster actors were coming in. My uncle not far behind them. My aunt threw a look at him, and he threw one back at her. To this day, I'm not sure what exactly those looks meant to each other, but I know that the only one my uncle gave my aunt made me nervous in a way that 10-year-old me didn't understand. But I would call it complete and utter dread now. Until the moment everyone was in their cars and on the way home for the night, my aunt and uncle seemed unusually on edge. I'll never forget the tension in the air around them as long as I'll live. Also, I'll never forget the relief I felt getting into my mother's car and driving away from the property, watching it all shrink into the darkness and distance behind me in the bright moonlight. I distinctly recall my mother asking if I was excited for next year already. I never answered her. But next year's event never arrived. My aunt and uncle announced that they wouldn't be able to run the haunted hike again, but never really said why. As I got older, it was explained to me that they were no longer able to afford the liability insurance, which, at the time, I didn't really understand, but I accepted it and moved on. Looking back, I'm surprised that my aunt and uncle didn't really talk about what happened with any other family members, or report it to the police. Then again, what would they have done? I wonder what my uncle found in the woods that would make him give that look to my aunt. I wonder what really was in that tree. I wonder if it's still out there. I wonder if my uncle knows what's out there. I wonder if they're afraid of it too. I wonder if my aunt and uncle shut down the hike because they had an idea of what they might have ended up being liable for. And that concludes our story tonight, guys. I really hope you enjoyed that one. I sure did. Please don't forget, please like, comment, share and subscribe to stay up to date with all of Dead Man Talking 666 content. Remember folks, be safe, not sorry.